mostly been due to higher fertilizer costs as a result of Russia's war on Ukraine. In the Babylon market in Bekasi, the price of eggs has increased by 28% to 32,000 rupiah per kilogram. Meanwhile, the price of shallots has surged by 66% to 40,000 rupiah per kilo. It was previously 24,000 rupiah per kilogram. And meanwhile, in Pandeglang, Banten, the price of cayenne pepper chilies have increased by 275% to 120,000 rupiah per kilogram. Previously, they were 32 to 34,000 rupiah per kilo. Now, some analysts say that food commodity prices have been surging due to a rise in production costs, namely a rise in fertilizer prices. And to talk more about the increase in food commodity prices in Indonesia, we are joined by Mohammad Faisal, who is the Executive Director of the Center of Reform on Economics, or CORE Indonesia. Thank you so much for joining us today, again, on Jakarta Movers and Shakers.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Right, so rising food prices is a global trend. And as we saw this just now, the price of food commodities in Indonesia is also increasing. Now, just explain to our audience, what is the reason behind this specifically in Indonesia, and should Indonesians be worried?
Yeah, I think I agree that Indonesians should be cautious about this issue, and this is, I think, the things that the government needs to anticipate and tackle. The reason behind this is, if we look back to in the past 2 years, after COVID-19 hit across the globe in 2020, and then many countries across the globe also provided various stimulus to contain the economic effect of the pandemic, including monetary and fiscal stimulus. And especially in developed countries, the amount of the stimulus is so huge that it can boost demand very, very significantly. But at the same time, the supply cannot just keep up with the increasing demand. And especially since last year, when the pandemic has started to contain, then the demand was increasing even further. And when the supply cannot keep up with the demand, then of course the price will increase as well. But there has been also further increase or pressure on food prices recently, starting this year, especially after the Russia and Ukraine war. So the war has magnified the impacts on supply disruptions this year. So what we can see right now, especially energy prices, has been hiking, leading to increase in transportation logistics costs, and of course other commodities, food prices, especially those produced by the countries in conflicts, especially wheat, sunflower, and also fertilizers. So yes, there are an increased demand after the containment of COVID-19 pandemic, but there is also supply disruptions and also geopolitical impacts on food prices as well.
Right. So as you summed up there, higher demand due to stimulus, supply that does not meet it, but also you're talking about Russia's war on Ukraine and how that's impacting food prices in Indonesia. Now, the Russia's war on Ukraine is impacting fertilizer prices around the world. Now, can you just talk to us more specifically, how is Indonesia impacted by this rising fertilizer prices, and are we able to sustain it, or will we have to deal with higher fertilizer prices and see food prices go up anyway?
Yeah, as we know that fertilizers is a very, very significant and important inputs for agriculture, which is also the raw materials for food and beverages industry, for example. And our agriculture, of course, depend on fertilizers, not only produced by domestically by Indonesia, but also from overseas. We can produce, for example, urea fertilizers. We have some plants that can produce urea, but other types of fertilizers like phosphate and also potassium chloride, we have to import from overseas. And the main suppliers for these types of fertilizers for there are four countries like Canada, China, Russia, and Belarus. So Canada provided the supply for Indonesia about 25%, China about 24%, Russia about 15%, and Belarus about 12%. And I highlight Russia and Belarus because these countries are those who are right now affected directly by the conflicts, you know. So there has been a very, very significant increase of fertilizers, especially from Russia and Belarus. The price of fertilizers from Russia, for example, has increased this year by over 200%, or about tripled the price in the beginning of this year. And also the fertilizers from Canada and Belarus has doubled. The price has doubled or increased by 100%. While China's fertilizers from China, I think, is still relatively cheaper compared to the other countries. So yeah, if the war still persists, as we know that the war still persists, then global fertilizers inflation still persists, then of course domestic food prices will keep on increasing the months to come. And even though there might be different effects between months, especially in the months to come, I think the food prices increase might not be as significant as the increase during the Ramadan and also Eid al-Fitr, but there will be also a larger increase would be at the end of this year.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, do you think Indonesia will be able to sustain this increase in fertilizer prices, or will we just have to give in and food prices will continue to increase for the rest of the year?
Yeah. Yes. So there are things that can be contained by Indonesia, especially by government policies, such as, for example, as we know that the government, you know, has provided more subsidy for energy, for fuel, and also for electricity, and also for LPG. That I think that can at least, you know, to impede the further increase of food prices, because as we know that fuel and also some other energy prices have a direct impact or indirect impact on food prices, because it becomes the energy inputs for transportation and also logistics costs. So with this increasing subsidy, at least the fuel price will stay the same. But other factors that will increase food prices in Indonesia, I think, will still persist. So in the months to come, I think at least the food prices increase in Indonesia. I believe that it will not affect very as significant as that happened in the US or many developed countries. So there can be further increase in food prices, but the increase will not be as significant or as precarious as the increase in many developed countries like the US.
All right. So I mean, can you just explain further why is it that Indonesia can sort of help keep food prices down, while, as you said, developed countries like the US, they're dealing with higher food prices? What is the difference there?
The difference is because first, for example, the US, we know that the fuel prices was not subsidized, and they also depend on fuel supply from overseas, including Russia. And in Indonesia, there are certain types of fuel that has been subsidized, that is still not subsidized by the government, especially the Pertalite. And the Pertalite has a very significant contribution to inflation in Indonesia, including food inflation. So if the subsidies still persist, I mean, the price of the fuel is still the same. I think the further increase of food prices can be, you know, at least can be at least contained by this pressure. But other factors like the increasing demand in Indonesia is also is not as significant as in the USA, because in the US, for example, as I said earlier, that the stimulus is so huge that it has boosted demand, domestic demand in the country. In Indonesia, the level of stimulus is not as significant as that in the US. So the increase in domestic demand is also not as significant as the increasing demand in the US. So that means that the price hikes is not as significant as the price increase in the US as well.
All right, so Indonesian subsidy policies, that is saving inflation in Indonesia quite a bit. And as you said, the stimulus in the US is quite high, not as high as in Indonesia. So that's also the difference there. Demand is not so high in Indonesia, so food price is not going up so high. Right, but I want to talk about another thing, which is the rise in protectionism. Now, amid Russia and the Ukraine war, many countries are limiting their exports of food and fertilizer to save kind of their own domestic supply for their own population, whether it's India, China as well, of course, Russia and Ukraine. So how should the government kind of approach this? And is this something that Indonesia, the government, should be really worried about and take action against?
Yeah. First of all, I believe that these tendencies of protectionism only happen to some countries, especially those with huge domestic demands, like India, probably also China, partly, and also, of course, Indonesia, because as we know that Indonesia has banned exports for CPO recently, even though it has been removed. India has also implemented export ban for sugar, for example, and that will impact also on Indonesia's sugar price. So I think that the tendency is mainly happen to those countries which have huge domestic demands. But for other countries which has a huge food supply, so like Australia and also the United States, I don't think this kind of protectionism has occurred.
Okay.
But I believe that this is something that Indonesia should also anticipate, especially the government, by first is anticipating the switch of those particular commodities to other producing countries. For example, sugar, with the export ban by India, we need to diversify and also switching to other countries, which also are huge suppliers of sugar, like Australia, Thailand, or China. And also we need also to anticipate by increasing domestic production, of course.
Okay, we're running slightly out of time, but can you just tell us your projection, how much will food prices possibly increase in the month of June in Indonesia, and how will it contribute to inflation in the month of June?
Well, I predict that the inflation in June will be a bit lower than the inflation in May, which is about 0.2 to 0.3%. And the contribution of food prices increase will be about half of those of that inflation, which means about 0.1 to 0.15%, also about 50% of those inflation. But we also need to anticipate also the increase of rice prices, because the big harvest will also soon be over. It's a seasonal effect.
All right, seasonal effects, but you're projecting inflation could go down this month. Positive views, hopefully that does happen.
Yes, compared to last month.
All right, Mohammad Faisal, the Executive Director of CORE Indonesia, thank you so much for your insights today.